Welcome to a new Team CGC 9.8 video. Alright team, so today is our pricing video where we look on eBay at the completed sales in CGC 9.8 books just from this past week. And I always say, the best thing you can do when you're buying these CGC 9.8 books is just to know the current market prices for your books, be aware of, the price action, and then, when you see a book online that you could possibly buy, you're going to know if that price is too much or, whatever it might be, or if it's a good deal and you might want to jump on it. So, yeah, more knowledge on the price is really the best thing you can do when you're buying these CGC 9.8 books. And, yeah, interesting week. A lot of great key issues. And, I think there's some more evidence, week to week here that the comic book market is correcting, I would say. It's an interesting time, I think. It's weird because the comic book market is correcting, but today the stock market, the U.S. stock market, is at all-time highs, which I don't think is a really good sign, to be honest. You would think that the comic books would do okay if people were doing really well with their stock portfolios. So maybe a bad sign there, but we'll get into some more commentary when we get into some of the prices here. So I want to remind you actually to send me your completed listings and prices, either in the comments below or on Instagram. Add me on Instagram, got all the link in the description below there. Send me your completed sales and prices. More eyeballs out there, better than just me doing some research and prices every week. So, I'll include them on this video if, stick to these cool key issues, from the 80s and 90s usually we stick to, so. Now, all these books we'll talk about are CGC 9.8s. They're all in US dollars. All the prices we'll talk about. I'll have a list in the description below if you want to follow along or whatever. So, first book, one that sold off of eBay, was an Ultimate Fallout number 4 last week. Saw one of these go, CGC 9.8, great looking copy, much like this one, for $345.05. And this is the first new SpiderMan, Miles Morales, so really kind of iconic, cool first appearance. A lot of potential, I think, in the long term for this book. I paid, like 2 months ago, $355, I think it was. And I had mentioned that this book has kind of been in a correcting mode, where a lot of these auctions that I used to watch were going for $400 quite often. Around $400 anyway, pushing $400, some even over $400 at times. The pictures were looking really good maybe or something. But coming down to $350. So I think this is one that you could really grab. You can, at this point, I've said in the last pricing video that Spider-Man comics, I think, are correcting maybe a little bit more severely than the rest of the market too, because of constant promotion of Spider-Man related things that have been coming out in the last kind of year or two, I think. Next book here that sold last week, and maybe some more evidence of a bit of a softness in the market. The New Mutants 98, first appearance of Deadpool. I saw one last week go for $610. And it was a direct edition copy. Wasn't like perfectly centered, but the scans were really good. You could see the whole entire book, and it was quite, honestly, almost perfectly centered. I considered buying. I was watching it, considered possibly purchasing it. But ended up going for $610. I've been sort of recommending here in the last 6 months, I would say, if you can get one of these for $650, that's a really good buy. So now you're seeing a couple of them going for under $650, $610 now. And the thing about New Mutants 98, great first appearance and everything, there's about 3,000 of them on the census. I think it's 2,990 something in the blue label. In CGC 9.8. So there's a lot of them out there, and there's just going to be a constant flood on eBay since there's a lot, right? So, every now and then I think one can go for a lower price, and $610 is one of the lowers I've seen lately. But yeah, you know what? Even though there's a softness in the market, if you really love these books, like for me, like I'm still buying right now. Like I don't really care what the market's doing, to be honest. Like, I just like these books. I'm buying them whether it's going up or down. It doesn't matter to me. But I think if you're maybe more of a market timer, I think right now is like, certainly in the last 2 years, 3 years, even pretty much since that Deadpool movie dropped, this has been the best time to buy a New Mutants 98. If you can grab one for about $600. Great buy, I think. Next book that sold last week, Uncanny XMen 221, first Mr. Sinister. This book I think is having some softness too. I mostly saw this go from like 200 to 220. I always thought was a fair, good price for this book. Saw one, actually, I think another one sold too that I actually didn't write down for about the same price here, but it was $187.50. So, you know, maybe a kind of a 10% softness in this book. Not, you know, very drastic. This one was nicely centered too. So I'm pretty surprised this one maybe didn't go over 200, really nicely centered one. So, whereas, you know, 6 months ago, a year ago, these were going over 200 pretty much. CGC 9.8, first Mr. Sinister. Even if it was off-centered. You know, even in an old case, it was like $200. New case, $220, $230 was like in auctions. So I think, yeah, more evidence of maybe a softening market. Amazing Spider-Man 238 sold. So ended up bringing out a box, which is pretty great. I think I got this one. Yeah, right. I hope I do. So one of these sold. It was in an old case in a newsstand version, though. A pretty good looking copy. Not. I've kind of on the record as saying this copy is perfect, and it's not as perfectly centered as this one, but a nice looking copy nonetheless. That one went for $1,081 in an auction. It was in an old case newsstand version of, you know, 9.8 white pages with the tattoos. So pretty good price. That's similar to what I paid for this, to be honest. Yeah. You know, I would say that's a, you know, fair to full price, but you know, when you see a good-looking a good-looking newsstand copy of Amazing Spider-Man 238 with like good scans, this one had good scans too. Those pictures were good, so you know, yeah, usually we'll go over that. Those will get over the 1,000 mark for the most part if there's good scans and it's a newsstand version of Amazing Spider-Man 238. Great first appearance of Hobgoblin. Next issue is Batman 357. Really excited to see one of these sell in the CGC 9.8s in an auction. A lot of times I've pretty much thought this book was like over 500. In the last year I saw it go for over $500. Usually in buy it now. So yeah, this book's quite rare as far as coming out in just an auction where you can bid on it. But one sold in an auction where you can bid on it. Last week, Batman 357 first Jason Todd, first Killer Croc for $416 in the CGC 9.8. Yeah, I think, you know, that's a really good deal, I think. I was kind of under the impression that all of these went for about 500. You know, maybe a little bit under 500, maybe a little bit over in the CGC 9.8. There was a newsstand version of this exact book in the CGC 9.8 white pages that was looking really good for $575. And I was kind of, you know, at certain times really wanting to buy that book. And you know what? This one for $416, I was lucky enough to grab this one. Really cheap shipping to Canada too. So yeah, I'm going to have an unbox of this pretty much Batman 1980s mega key in, you know, hopefully a week or two. So excited. All right, Amazing Spider-Man 316 sold, but an interesting one because it was a newsstand version of 316. So this book here, but in the newsstand, in the CGC 9.8. And it's quite an elusive book. You know, the 80s newsstands, I think, are quite more elusive than 90s newsstands. And, you know, the prices reflect that because this thing, you know, I've seen this book go for like $220 in the past couple months here, which is, this book has softened from about $275, $280, maybe even $300 for a nice one to, you know, seeing them go closer to $200 now. Yeah, $220. But in a newsstand, seeing one go for last week, I was really excited about this. To be honest, I bid on this one. So it ended up going for $542.58. Whereas again, I'm seeing these ones go for $220 in the direct version. And newsstand versions being more rare, and they have the UPC barcode here, but basically the same exact cover. So yeah, really almost going for 3 times the price, like definitely well over 2 times the price for a direct version in the Amazing Spider-Man 316 newsstand version for $542.58. So I bid, let me put this back here, what is it spelled? I bid $475. So $475 I thought was pretty much an egregious overpay, and I was like, oh, hopefully I'll win it. But yeah, completely outbid by a good $75 almost. So okay, next book that sold is Star Wars #1. I grabbed one out here, a great looking copy that I have. Lucky to have a Star Wars one. I think, you know, for a 70s book in the CGC 9.8, you can still get it for under $1,000. I think it's a great buy. And yeah, it's cool because saw one last week. Not perfectly centered, albeit, you know, mine is basically perfectly centered. It's got a little white cover slab, but it's centered nonetheless down the spine, the white strip. This one, not perfectly centered, but went for $787.77 in the CGC 9.8, and it was an auction. I think that's looking great, especially before this Star Wars movie. I'm surprised that deal kind of came through, and I'm sure, like, if Star Wars drops and it ends up doing really well, gets good reviews, and, you know, maybe the community gets a bit pumped up for it, I mean, I bet you could throw that up at $1,000. Buy it now, and I bet it would sell in the next like month or two. Get with the movie coming out. So yeah, $787.77, great price for Star Wars #1. Yeah, it's a 1977 book in the CGC 9.8. You know, books in the 70s get so expensive, so to get this one for $787.77, I think is a good deal. Yeah, Amazing Spider-Man 252, saw one sell, and let's see, yeah. In a newsstand too. And this is a book I mentioned that I think, you know, some softness in the market certainly. I think it was a well-recommended book over the last year or two, and kind of had a run up to $500 pretty much and over. But one had sold last week for $385 in the newsstand, and this was just in a buy it now. Like someone put up this book for $385, CGC 9.8 in the newsstand. And it's sold, and that, you know, it'll sell really quick at that price. I think probably in about a week or two. It's I would say a fair price for this book, and you know, it wasn't perfectly centered. Like I really like this copy too, because a perfectly centered newsstand 252 is a good find, good to have in the collection. That is a book I would pretty much recommend in this point. You know, 252 and Marvel Team Up 141, first black costumes in the CGC 9.8. I think are cool investment grade books of the era, and the prices are 10 to 20% less than they were in auctions than they were 6 months to a year ago. And yeah, one selling for $385 in the newsstand last week. Star Wars 42 in a newsstand, in a new case as well. So this is kind of the major key of the Star Wars run, besides Star Wars #1. Star Wars 42, first Boba Fett and first Yoda within the comic book run. And this one went for $478. And it's got like Boba Fett on the cover. A newsstand version went for $478. In a buy it now, I think this is a bit of an overpay. This is like quite a full price. I saw a direct version of in a new case, very similar looking to this book, but not a newsstand version, direct version. Went for $350 in an auction. So I would think the newsstand version in an auction would probably go for about $400, maybe a little bit over that right now. So $478 is, I think, you know, someone just wanted it right now and paid an extra $75, which, you know, good for them, I would say. I have this book too, but it's in another box. I probably should have brought it up. Next book here is we can get into some commentary on it. Interesting prices going on with this book. It was NYX #3, the first X-23, first appearance of Laura Kinney. So in the CGC 9.8, saw 3 of them sell last week, which was really cool. You don't see that too often. So 3 of them sold. One was for $770, one was for $696, and one was for $660. So I think some softness in this book for sure too. And you know what? I think one of the parts of the market that may be kind of correcting the most at this point is sort of obvious female superheroes that have been really hot in the last, I don't know, let's call it 5 to 10 years. NYX #3, you know, sort of with Hulk 181 just blowing up, first Wolverine, anything sort of related to Wolverine blew up, and this was kind of certainly probably the #1 sort of book that blew up along with 181, to be honest. Yeah, first X-23, I was seeing this go for, let's call it in the last 6 months to a year, for nearing $1,000, and I think 800 was maybe a pretty good deal. I think you'd be happy with that. So yeah, to see some go for 660 and 696, and then yeah, I just think some of these obvious female superheroes are probably correcting a little bit more harder than, you know, a book that I'll talk about a little bit later that's not really correcting at all, a Wolverine limited series #1. So like there's some classic books I think that are out there that just have that cult following and are reasonably priced and that aren't correcting, but this NYX #3, you know, there was a temptation in the last 5 years just to like buy all the first new Spider-Gwen, first NYX #3, even if you didn't really care about them or you didn't have any connection to them or you didn't, like that's why I really love to buy what I loved when I was a kid and that I have a connection with, because rather than just, you know, going, oh, these female superheroes are so owned and unknown, and you know, that's a really cool area to just buy, and then you just buy a lot of, you know, maybe first female superheroes that you're not really too pumped about. So maybe that's happened in the last 5 years with NYX 23, and you know, seeing some softness in the prices, or maybe it's just general market softness, which there's a lot of evidence for that too. So maybe I'm looking into it a bit too much. Next book, Batman Vengeance of Bane Signature Series book. In an auction went, and it was signed by Graham Nolan, who did some of the art inside the book with another artist. Forget the other artist's name, but to see it go in an auction, it looked really cool with his signature on it, to be honest. And the book ended up going for $340. And you see this go in auctions in a new case, not signed for, you know, $225, $230, let's call it, anywhere around there. So another, $120 for a signature. That's not too bad, and it was looking pretty good. It looked really cool with the signature, to be honest. So I thought I'd add $340 for a Batman Vengeance of Bane Signature Series. Young Avengers #1. So this is a book that kind of got hot amid all these Avengers movies coming out. A modern book, this one. Saw many of them in the last 6 months to a year go for $250 in a CGC 9.8. Saw one last week go for $177.50. And this is just kind of the normal first print, full color print. There's a sketch version, stuff like that too. But this is kind of a cool book that I really like. And you're seeing a lot of like these modern key issues, I think, that were sort of going for over 200 in the last year or two. I'm seeing some juicy, like, you know, I kind of want to buy some that are popping up for like 175, 150-ish. You know, even the first Infinity Gauntlet's a good example of that, where with all those Avengers movies coming out, that book was like 230 to 250. And now in auctions, I see those go for like 150, 157, 155. You know, Silver Surfer 44, first appearance of the Infinity Gauntlet in the CGC 9.8. Yeah, so Young Avengers kind of caught fire with all those Avengers movies, was going for 250, now it's 177.50. You know, even like Batman First Red Hood 635, that was like pushing 300, and there's still a lot of buy it nows for really high prices in that book, but in an auction, I've seen that go for like 150 something, 160 something, like. So even now, you know, some of these modern books that were kind of heating up, I think, are kind of softening with this kind of overall market correction. Avengers 684 sold, the first Immortal Hulk. One sold for $89.99. I think that's a pretty good price, and it was a buy it now. I think even in an auction, you're looking at like maybe like $82 or something. Yeah, first Immortal Hulk, a really cool kind of affordable modern CGC 9.8, I think. Avengers 684. So a Wolverine limited series. Some interesting information here because yeah, I happen to have one. I bought mine for $276. So one sold last week, CGC 9.8 for $275. And yeah, as far, you know, when I've started exclusively going CGC 9.8 kind of in the last 2 years, let's call it, pretty much Wolverine limited series has been $275. And this whole market softness that's going on right now, I think is, you know, I've said it's related to a lot of promotional type things like these female superheroes. SpiderMan's a lot of promotion lately. That Deadpool movie that blew up Deadpool 5 years ago, that's still softening, I think. You know, Into the Spider-Verse came out, so Miles Morales, Spider-Gwen got so hot. Those parts of the comic book market, I think, are correcting quite hard. Whereas a Wolverine limited series #1, such a classic book, a cult following type book that real hardcore comic fans really like. Still holding strong at $2.75. Interesting though, a CBCS 9.8 saw one sell. Really good looking one too. It wasn't like perfectly centered, but the colors looked good, and it was quite a high grade CGC 9.8. It looked like a CBCS Wolverine Limited Series #1 went for $236. So $236 for the CBCS, $275 for the Wolverine Limited Series CGC 9.8. So it just gives you an idea of how the premium of a CGC over a CBCS. So yeah, and that's cool. I think it makes me kind of want to grab some more cheap CBCS books, to be honest. Saw a Spawn #1 black and white, the sort of very limited reprint of Spawn #1 that came out in like '97, I think it was. And this was a signature series book signed by McFarlane in the CGC 9.8 in an auction too. So yeah, I think I'm a big Spawn fan, and I personally would rather have Spawn #1 in a newsstand. And I know how Spawn #1s, there were so many of them printed, and and I know the Spawn #1 black and white had a limited print, so that's why it's so expensive. I'll give you the price here though. So a signature series Spawn #1 black and white McFarlane signed, $1,345 in an auction too. Started from $1 or something like that. So that's I think a really good price. Like this is a signed book too. I think a non-signed book is going for about $1,000 of this one. So I think that's a decent price for this book signed. Yeah, for me, I probably would just rather have a couple more Spawn #1 newsstands in the CGC 9.8 personally. That is the first appearance of Spawn, and known as the first full appearance of Spawn. And these reprints that are just limited runs, sure, they're limited runs and it's more limited, but there's no real first appearance there. And I think for me too, like, I didn't really remember this coming out in the 90s very much, so I have no real nostalgic connection to it. I guess I don't know, I didn't read The Wizard that week or something, when I was like 11 or 12 when it came out. So more nostalgic for me is Spawn #1, and plus you get the first full appearance, and in a newsstand signed maybe would be probably about half price, I would say too. So a signed newsstand maybe is like $600, whereas a signed Spawn #1 black and white $1,345. Yeah, kind of too. I don't know. I'd rather, like I said, I prefer the Spawn newsstand CGC 9.8 #1. Next book, Star Wars 107, the last issue of Star Wars. So kind of a cool key issue. In Star Wars, one sold for $255.01 in the CGC 9.8 in an auction. Yeah, and that's the last issue of Star Wars. Amazing Spider-Man 361. So cool to see one of these sell, because I was kind of curious to see how it's been doing in the sort of market correction. But one looking exactly like this in the direct version. I got one with the UPC code too, the newsstand version. But one sold just like this in the direct version for $317.69. And the pictures weren't looking the best, and the cover from the back was slightly showing on the front, so not perfectly centered. I was interested to see this book because, Carnage fans are just such a cult following, I think, and I was wondering if there'd be some softness. And you know what? I think that, that's a really good price, $317.69. Usually you're looking for like $350. I always thought, like, in the direct version of this, like, $340 would have been, like, a really good deal. $340 to $330, because sometimes you see them push $200 if they're really nicely centered. And this one this one I had CGC'd myself, and it came back at 9.8, so I'm super lucky there. But my newsstand version of a 361, which I did buy in a CGC 9.8 on eBay for just over $400. I think it was like $404 or something. And it's perfectly centered. So for a perfectly centered one in a newsstand, you're probably looking at about $400. But yeah, $317.69 last week. One went in the direct version. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good deal, and I think maybe that book's softening too. There's tons of them on the CGC in the CGC census in the CGC 9.8, 3,000 something I think it is. Yeah, it's similar to New Mutants 98, where there's just always new ones coming up for auction on eBay, so any softness in the market is going to really show in like those 90s books, I think, and that's what you're seeing with New Mutants and Carnage. Next book here is SpiderMan 2099, #1. A cool book from like 1992 with that foil blue cover for $64. Saw one go for in an auction. And last book here is Iron Man 282, first full War Machine. A book in the past I've said I wanted, and you know, it just seems like everyone I see that I could possibly buy has like some annoying thing about the centering or something that annoys me or whatever it might be, but it's never happened for me. But one sold last week for $152.50, and I would say that's like a fair price for this book, right around $150. You know, maybe for a nice copy, $175-ish, maybe pushing $200, but yeah, that's a good fair price for first full War Machine Iron Man 282, I think it is, eh? Yeah, 282? Yeah. Hopefully I wrote that down right. Okay, that's the last book, though. So yeah, full list. Seeing some evidence in the prices that, you know, the softness in the comic market is real. And, you know, even just speaking to some other collectors that are you know, involved in other eras than me, sort of Bronze Age, Silver Age, Golden Age collectors. They're sort of seeing the same thing, I think, like you know, a correcting softness, you know, certainly from about a year ago, I would say. I think, you know, even last year, like I just, like last summer specifically, last year in the summer, I think was probably the peak of the comic book market. And unfortunately, I honestly bought a lot of books then, like, that was sort of when I was starting to ramp up buying quite a bit. But, you know, I'm still buying quite a bit, so it's like I'm just buying through the whole thing, basically. I don't really care too much about what the market is doing. Interesting nonetheless, though. And you always you just want to have the knowledge, so then you know what's going on, so, you know, you don't panic and you don't sell out or anything. Like, I don't think, you know, there's a free fall in the market at all. And especially, you know, with New Mutants 98, Deadpool could be coming to the MCU. I mean, there's only been 2 Deadpool movies. The first 2 were huge, or 3. The first, they were all hits. There's going to be way more. It's just, it's going to go on forever, essentially, because capitalism, basically. So any Disney-owned property, any MCU Disney, Star Wars is owned by Disney now. All of that is just going to be constantly pumped out over the next 50 years, 50 to 100 years. Like, Disney will not stop, trust me. So, yeah, you know what? I think you buy the softness right now. You know, if you love these books, you know, you should buy for the pride of ownership anyway. You shouldn't be buying because, like, ooh, in 5 years, my book's going to be worth $100 more. Don't buy because of that. If that's why, you know, you're buying comic books, you know, I wouldn't get into it too much. If that's sort of your main reason, get into it because you love the covers and you just want, you know, for me in the CGC 9.8, I just want the super high grade of all those awesome covers that I loved when I was a kid. And if you love art, you know, you're just so drawn to the hobby, and yeah, you just really want to own all those covers that you loved when you were a kid. That's my feelings on it. So yeah, don't do it too much for profit, but markets are awesome. I love financial markets and prices and free markets, and yeah, the comic book market in the CGC 9.8 market is a free market, and it's awesome to kind of see them, you know, fluctuate with some of the promotion and everything. But I'm totally blabbing on. So I'd invite you to join the team and subscribe to Team CGC 9.8 and hit the bell to get all their latest notifications. Add me on Instagram and Twitter too. More active on Instagram, to be honest. So add me on Instagram. All the links are in the description below. But yeah, some great prices, some really interesting kind of prices and evidence to look over, you know, talking about the comic book market softness. So, alright, thank you very much for supporting the channel. Thanks for all the comments. You know, well over 500 subs, I think, now, too. So, yeah, just kind of so thankful with kind of the direction the channel is going. I think it's kind of all positive at this point. So, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.